I guess a good place to start is to say that in the absence of an overarching policy demand, employers will not have a particular response. So whatever responses are coming in response to their own initiatives. Sometimes it may arise out of leadership by women who are aware of this, so they now start to create a more conducive environment for other women going through menopause. Others, it just, I think there's just been conversation around it. But in the absence of a national policy demand, it would be very difficult to find, shared actions across many employers. But that doesn't mean people are not doing some things. You would have read, you would have shared, companies, whether multinationals, are domesticating policies that they have at global level and applying them in the context of Kenya. I think I remember reading about the Standard Chartered group sometime last year. So at least there's been some response. I checked with the Federation of Employers yesterday, talking to Jackie and asking, are you guys discussing this? No, they're not discussing it as at board level yet. But that basically tells you, given the fact that menopause is something that has been stigmatized, there's been a lot of silence, there's a lot of rumors, there isn't shared knowledge around it. It's very hard to mainstream those conversations. So I think a conversation like this today is actually going to be helpful in forcing people to have that conversation in their boardrooms. Now, why should employers care about menopause? I mean, that's the other thing. It's not just that it is demanded by law. When it is demanded by law, they will care. The way they care about, maternity leave, now paternity leave, the way many employers are providing, child-rearing facilities in their, in factories, so child nursing facilities. Those have become normalized because we've talked about them, but at the same time, it's also because they are aware about their productivity of their workers. Facilitating lactating mothers to have access to their children has a lot to do with productivity. So, and they have studied, and there are studies that have shown that. So for me, the other thing that is really missing in this context is sufficient data and research that shows the impact of menopause on productivity of women in Kenya. In early stages, when we were discussing, women's rights-related issues, we relied a lot on data. What does it take to be more inclusive, to have more, women-friendly policies? And you could demonstrate from data, and that data informed policy, and then it informed legislation. If we don't have data on what my brain fog costs the company, or an afternoon of non-productivity, how much does it cost the company? And if there are several of us there, then several of us in that age group, a company will not take it very seriously unless it is something that they actually notice it is costing them their productivity. And it is critical to note that the people who are going through menopause are your senior staff. They are your experienced staff. People above 45 are people that are making critical decisions. So if I make a bad investment decision, it's going to cost the company, and they need to become aware that if they don't support that sort of cadre of people, they're going to lose productivity. Now, if they decide that the best way, because usually sometimes employers decide, what about the cost of it? But what is the cost of letting go of senior people at 45, 48, or even 51, compared to making the workplace more accommodative for them? So I think for me, the bigger lesson in this conversation is, first, conversations around menopause need to really go a notch higher to make it commonplace. And those should be talked, not just in the outpatient departments, but this should be part and parcel of employee conversations. I checked with the HR officer in our organization last week and asked, do we talk about menopause? And she said, actually, yes. We did have a talk last year, and we're scheduled to have another one this year. So at least it tells you it is being surfaced. Then I asked her, what about in other, in your HR community of practice? Is this something you're talking about? Yes, it is. And then thirdly, in the case of our organization, is it covered in our insurance? And yes, it is. But now that is just an example of our own organization. There may be others that don't. But you can push the line, and that's, activists like yourself can push the line. If you can cover maternity for reproductive young women, young workers, why can you not cover menopause treatment? If we can have talk about mental health, every quarter there's a talk on mental health. But why don't we talk about menopause? So that, hair loss for Millie, hot flashes for somebody else, palpitations for others, sleep deprivation, and all these other things can become commonplace, because I think we are dealing with absence of shared knowledge. In our churches, we will talk about parenting. I'm sure you've gone through parenting classes in church. Have you had menopause discussions? And you're in the women's committee. So what I'm trying to say is that employers will respond to signals from society. And if those signals are not forthcoming, they will not. If somebody then says, oh, in our organization, people just sharing, what do we do? In our organization, we put menopausal women near the door, near the window, so they, they get fresh air. We supply fans, or we don't mind them hogging the fans. And you know people who hog the fan, right? So if you normalize that experience, and you take it away from stigma. Because I think for me that is the challenge. The more you stigmatize it, I'm glad your colleague in parliament, and it wasn't a rumor, and please congratulate him that he was aware that that mood swing was menopause related. But you hadn't known about, but maybe his wife was menopausal and he had gone through it at home, so he had better experience. He saw about hot flashes. But we need each other in this conversation. And it's not a conversation, that's my second point, it's not a conversation for women alone. We made reproductive health-related issues women-only issues for a long time. Menstrual health, we made it women's issues alone. And yet there were fathers who would feel embarrassed if you asked them for money for pads. You remember those? So sometimes, even when you wanted to go and ask as little children, I remember when I was having my menses, so I'd ask my father, because he was the one with money, I need money. For what? Then I'd not be able to say it's for my periods. I said, it's just for private things. And I think he figured, and somehow it's like, no, he would get me some money. But many men that generation didn't participate in menstrual product purchases for their daughters. It was all handled by women, by their mothers, and you were actually told not to tell your father, as if he didn't know. So if we can normalize these conversations, it will be helpful so that your partner can support you, your co-workers can support you. They're not going to go snickering behind. But fortunately, because of AI, I think these boys are also Googling menopause, so they probably know a lot more than we give them credit for. So I think as I end, I think the point I'm making is that even if there isn't a national policy requiring employer response so far in the country, in reality, many employers are quite far-sighted and doing something. Okay, they may be the multinationals that are domesticating policy, but others will learn from them, and when we talk about, when other workers talk about it, they will be able to bring the same learnings from the organization. But the other thing that I think people are also acting on is that they're also responding to the legal framework around discrimination, equality at work. So even if I'm menopausal and I am moody and I am, cranky in the office, you can't get rid of me before before retirement age. Otherwise, I can sue you for discrimination. And we can, and I'm sure the lawyers in the House can begin to activate even on the basis of, employment laws and discrimination. But we just need to have a bigger conversation, a more national conversation, so that we would have more employers responding, whether from the formal sector, but those signals will also go to the informal sector. Paternity leave was I remember giving paternity leave in my previous organization at the Association of Manufacturers, and the guys were still embarrassed by taking paternity leave. And it was only 2 weeks. Now there are companies that will actually give you paternity leave of 3 months. And the men, especially the younger fathers, are taking advantage, taking advantage of it and bonding with their children. So this change doesn't come overnight. And for those of you starting the journey, ICRW, trying to normalize and mainstream conversations on menopause, these changes in culture, normalizing it will not happen overnight. It is just something that we need to keep going at it. And before long, even the informal sector in Kenya will be aware and will be, supporting their workers in that response. So employers respond to incentives. Those incentives come from policy, come from requirements, but they also come from their own assessment of their own bottom line and the impact of not supporting this productive, even if they are older workers, because definitely they are not younger. It's just that there are some in their senior ranks by that time. Thank you very much.